have one feeling about that. What you said earlier on is something to say. I have a feeling is that when they have the decision, especially Galadriel, and this is very similar in the Turin story, they actually they don't go back because they're ashamed as well. It's not just they want to continue the path, and you see that in Turin because it, Thingol forgives him for killing that singer guy. Daron? No, was it?
Cyrus.
Yes, exactly.
Byron is his own bundle of problems.
Yeah, of course. So he forgives him and he says, you're welcome back, and it's all good, but he doesn't go. And that is very similar in my mind to what Galadriel's story is, that she, all that happened. And yes, she wanted those lands. She wanted to rule over something which she wouldn't have. She was so low in the line of succession in Aman. She would never have ruled anything. Probably she would always be a princess, daughter of someone, because elves are immortal, right? So she knew that, but she wanted to rule. She wanted, that was her pride. Yes, that's also a part of that, but I also do think there was this aspect of she was ashamed to go back, and unlike her father, who said, I effed up, please forgive me, she didn't want, and yes, that's her pride as well, but she didn't want to do it. And Turin was the same. So that also plays into this whole doom thingy for them, for these two especially.
Yeah, they get all the Noldor get that chance, and most of them do, I think, reject it out of a fear or shame. The
Fëanorians, they because they want to, their father told them not to, so they did it for their father. But Galadriel wasn't bound to that. She had different reasons, so it's interesting that all these elves going to Middle Earth went there for literally various reasons and didn't go back.
Yeah, and I think, of course, the story of Galadriel's ultimate sort of repentance and what rules apply to her versus, don't apply to her versus what's her own choice.
Yeah.
That's a hugely complicated question. Galadriel's a very difficult character in terms of tracing her history through the different.
He changed it. There are so many versions of Galadriel.
Yeah, and we can't, versions that contradict themselves.
Yes.
But one of the versions has her, and this is it's a great line. At the end of all of this, at the end of the first age, when the Valar arrive with reinforcements to wipe Morgoth off the face of the planet and sink the whole continent and say, okay, we'll save what's left of you, and you guys have a chance now to return. All of the Noldor do, and all of the other elves as well that chose not to make the journey initially. It's kind of okay, it's reopened, you can come back. And they say to Galadriel, you can come back too, you just repent and you can come back to sort of live in exile on this island, but you'll be safe. And Galadriel spurns them. She says, what did I do wrong? I'm not a kinslayer. I didn't take an oath. I haven't done anything horrible while I'm here. I've just been trying to help the war effort and oppose Morgoth, which you guys weren't doing a very good job of, arguably. She says, what, I forget the exact word, but what wrong did the Golden House of Finarfin do?
My crime. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, and we were innocent in this, and you're holding us to the same standard as, the killers and the murderers and the, traitors, and that's not right. And so I spit on your pardon. I will go off and make my own way.
Yeah, it's similar to what Fëanor said. He compared all the Valar to Morgoth and his deeds, and he said, "Aren't you akin to that guy?" It's very similar.
Yeah, it's she spurns them even after all the events of the first age, because she basically says, I don't deserve to go back and have to humble myself and live in shame for something that I didn't really do. Again, parallel to Turin, who's, really didn't mean to kill Cyrus. It was sort of an accident and a combination of that and self-defense, and Cyrus shot first, that kind of thing. But,
yeah, true.
But that's kind of one of the things, even after Thingol says, well, I can see that you weren't entirely to blame here. Just come back and we'll make it right. And he says, no, you exiled me for something that I didn't
Yeah.
do. And it doesn't matter that you didn't have a full understanding of the situation. I'm still upset. And so I'm going to stay out here in exile
Mm.
that I don't deserve to be in.
Yeah.
Doom everyone as I wander around. Poor
Yeah.
Turin.
No.
But no, not really.
No.
Um, does
No
he
redemption
does
for
he
Turin.
deserve it? He had a
No
terrible
justice for
childhood.
Turin. That's my hashtag.
Oh,
No.
yeah. I
It's my favorite book, don't get me wrong. Like,
it's
the Children of Hurin is the best book in the 3 standalone books, but no justice for him.
no. Well, I think he got. I think he's suffered enough. I think by the end of his life, I think we can say, okay, fair. you
You
you got
know?
what was coming to you.
He had it coming. I saw it coming. But yeah, he got his revenge in the not canon version of the Dagora. So Tolkien must. This is what Tolkien said with giving him the kill. He
Mm-hmm.
deserved it.
Yeah, something he did something right at some point. Maybe
Yeah.
one thing once in
Yeah.
his life.
Yeah.
Um,
Good. Back to our elves.
yes, we get to talk about Mitros now, and I'm so excited.
Oh. Is
his
he your
own mo-
favorite? Is
his
he your
own mo-
favorite of the Seven Sons?
I have a very soft spot for Celegorm. Actually, he's a terrible human being, but I know, right? It's awful. I think he's a really fascinating character. I like this weird sort of vibe where he's older than Curufin, but he always listens to Curufin. Huon likes him, so at one point he must have been really cool. He's friends with Arathel, and then he just devolves into this like extremely sinister figure.
Yeah.
Rivaling some of the worst things that evil men or dwarves or even some orcs do.
Yeah.
So I mean, I wouldn't like leave him alone with any member of my family for any extended period of time, but
No.
I would watch a TV show about him all day. Like I would eat that
Okay.
popcorn. Just
Okay. Is
watch
he the
watch
one
the train wreck.
who are the two with the Silmarils in the end? It's Maglor and
Maglor and Mithros, and Mithros is the one that hangs on the
Medros
cliff.
is okay. Yeah.
Mithros
Okay.
is kind of the fan favorite as far as the Fanorians go because he's
Yeah.
the level-headed one. He's got a lot
And he
of
gives the kingship to Fingolfin, which is kind of
yeah.
cool.
He works really hard to like smooth things over when his
Yeah.
brothers screw up. He's always portrayed as being the one who's trying to make the best of a bad situation, but he is of
Yeah.
course still bound by the oath. So
Yeah.
after this whole business where Beren and Luthien reclaim the Silmaril and Finrod, perishes and Celegorm and Curufin have kind of been kicked out of Nargothrond and show up and say, okay, we may have screwed up a little bit here. We might be in some trouble. You may be receiving some angry letters about us. Maybe more than angry letters. Maybe some threats in there, death threats. I don't know. So Mithras has this plan to fight, bring an end to Morgoth's evil once and for all. He sees that just, the past example of holding the siege and just waiting things out hasn't worked because Morgoth just gathers strength and will eventually break out. So he's seen that happen. With news that Beren and Luthien have actually reclaimed a Silmaril, he's like, well, and plus Fingolfin being able to wound Morgoth and give him a limp, and he can't really issue forth anymore to fight in single combat. Mithras is like, well, this is probably the weakest he's ever going to be. We should move now. Unfortunately, the weakest Morgoth is ever going to be is still not quite weak enough. So Mithras hustles really hard to get as many people involved in this as he can. He, reaches out to a bunch of different tribes of men. He reaches out to all the elves that will still talk to him. Thingol sends nobody because forget you guys forever. He was pretty much only tolerating the Noldor on behalf of Finrod and his siblings, and now they're all basically dead, so Thingol says, nope, absolutely not. He sends Beleg and Mablung. He sends 2 people. And that's only because they say, this sounds really exciting and you can't tell us not to go. So Thingol says, okay, fine, you 2 can go. But literally 2 people from Doriath, which is probably the the
Yeah.
largest remaining
Which like
intact
Bellic
realm.
breaking my heart later
I
on, but
know.
no, like let's not talk about that. But
We'll
we'll talk
save
about
him.
that
Well,
another
we have to
time.
save something to talk about when we get to the Teleri and the Sindar.
Yeah.
And Bellic is like, he is the bro of bros. He
Yeah.
is such a
Yeah.
loyal individual. But apart from those two Sindar, no one else comes forward. But Fingon, who's kind of inherited the High King mantle, he of course comes to the aid of his friend. The remaining sons of Feanor gather their remaining peoples from wherever they've been scattered to, and they all decide to march on Angband and try and break it open. And, you know, again, like I said, this is supposed to be the final push that's going to destroy evil forever, because they can sense that Morgoth is kind of like at a weak point here, relatively speaking. Well, a lot of his men betray him. A lot of his people don't show up. Morgoth uses a little bit of psyops. He has some of their people executed brutally in front of them, which causes a premature charge.
Yeah.
Mithras is delayed coming in, I believe, from he's on the east and Fingon's on the west, and he can't come to the aid of Fingon, and so it is a disaster. Mithras has basically grouped everyone together to be wholesale slaughtered. This is the fifth battle, the battle known as the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. I think I pronounced that right, or also known as the Unnumbered Tears, because it just like, and the year it takes place in is called the Year of Lamentation. It's just like this
Yeah.
apocalyptically awful battle.
Yeah.
Um,
And
Morgoth's,
you know what
yeah,
the doom was? They said, "Tears unnumbered ye shall shed." So
yes, and this is definitely that coming back to bite them. You know, the treachery of Celegorm and Curufin in Nargothrond against Finrod, and the treachery of men against. It's mostly the men who are allied with the Sons of Feanor, of course,
yeah.
because irony. Um, those are kind of the factors that shift things such that they really have no hope of victory, and it just turns, you know, from this, you know, in some versions you sense that they almost have a chance, you know, it's such a great force that they've mustered, and they're so valiant and so determined that they really, you know, if just a couple more things had gone right for them, they could have
Yeah.
possibly succeeded. But of course the doom comes back and it bites them in the butt,
Yeah.
and all of their hopes just sort of crumble. They're in the worst position ever. Morgoth is basically running amok over all of their lands and territories. They've all gone into hiding. There's still Gondolin, but that's and Nargothrond stands for a few more years as well. But
Yeah.
that's basically it for the Noldor.
Yeah. They're
So
fleeing the battlefields. That's what they're doing.
yeah, they're trying not to get captured and killed for decades after this. They're on the run.
Yeah.
They don't really have any fortresses or any sort of line, any sort of unity. Fingon dies.
Yeah.
So that's Turgon technically becomes High King now, but he's in Gondolin, so it's not like he's, you know, out here making decrees.
It's a
And
name. Yeah.
yeah, it's really just a title at this point. It's very hollow,
Mm-hmm.
very sad. This is one of the most depressing points, and of course they choose this time in the war to reawaken the oath and decide that what they really need to do, you know, forget that whole business with Morgoth having two of the Silmarils. What we really need to do is attack Doriath, because they still have a Silmaril, and we actually have a hope of, you know, getting it. So due to events that we will discuss in a later installment, Thingol is dead at this point. Beren and Luthien have passed on beyond the circles of the world. Their son Dior has the Silmaril, and the Sons of Feanor descend upon Menegroth in the dead of winter and just rip the place up. We lose the Middle Seas. We lose Celegorm, Caranthir, and Curufin in this fight. Dior is slain. His sons are lost in the woods. Which again, this is why people like Mithras, because Mithras finds out that, you know, oh,
Yeah.
he had kids, and his young daughter Elwing flees with the Silmaril down to the mouth of Sirion.
Coast. Yeah.
Yeah, to the coast. So they have like a secret sort of settlement there.
Yeah.
Something that Círdan has kind of kept up.
Mm-hmm.
Círdan, by the way, we'll get into him with the Teleri, but Círdan really being like the one immovable rock in all of this chaos and these shifting forces and moving people. It's like, and then there's Círdan, and he's still hanging out in the west, and he's still just kind of holding down the fort.
And I do think he's one of the OG elves, which makes him even cooler, because he's literally older than any one of the princes or anyone there.
Yeah, he's got seniority, I think, for sure. He grows a beard. That you got to be a
He's seen a lot.
yeah, yeah, he has. He can recognize Gandalf too. He's very cool.
Yeah.
So the Feanorians, having sacked Menegroth, and there's three of them left or 3 to 4 of them left at this point. We won't get into whether or not
Yeah.
Feanor actually barbecued one of his young twin sons.
For me, it's canon.
Yeah, no, I think it makes it more interesting anyway. So at this point,
Totally.
it's Maedhros the one-handed, the ginger.
Yeah.
It's Maglor the bard with the harp and the voice and everything,
We'll add
and
the
then
family tree here so you people have an idea what are these girls talking about.
I can like draw X's over the heads of all the ones who have died at this point.
Yeah, continue with the dead.
Yeah. It's just like check off them all as they perish horribly. So Maedhros actually like spends a good deal of time trying to find these sons of Dior that have been lost in the woods because he doesn't want them to starve. You know, he's still got that. We see this a lot with Maglor and Maedhros. They're the
Yes.
ones who resist the oath. You know, they'll commit an atrocity and then they'll feel remorse for it and seek to undo it, but it doesn't really work out for them all that well. And Maedhros never finds the sons of Dior. They're just kind of presumed lost. We never really hear for sure what happens to them. There's different ideas, different versions, different theories, but he doesn't succeed. He's out there looking in the snow, you know, trying to hunt them down to save them, and presumably if he even got close to them, they would just flee from him farther because, you know, he just murdered their entire family. So, you know, understandable.
Let me just chime in with a pre-Medros story, which is actually really cool. And you know, I'm very much into Greek mythology these days, and I've been rereading. And this is such a good book, by the way. I can recommend this. And you know, I like my Greek mythology, and the Medros story is actually what happened to him before. It's actually so cool, and it's very Prometheus like. You know, he was bound by his wrist because you just mentioned he just had one hand. Why does this dude has one hand? And so he was bound by his wrists on Thangorodrim on the mountains by Morgoth. And he was rescued then, just like Prometheus. It's very, very similar. Just the eagle helped this time and didn't pick apart his organs or his liver or whatever. I think we even mentioned this in the last one. I'm not really sure. But this is so cool. And well, he got Finrod. Finrod, it was Finrod, right? Yeah.
Fingon.
Oh, Fingon rescued. Sorry, yes, Fingon rescued him. Sorry, yes, and he got rescued by Fingon, but he had to cut off, you know, his, and it was actually his sword hand, which is very important for later on. He had to cut it off and then, you know, free him thereby. And this is then, you know, later on, this is why he kind of gives the kingship to Fingolfin. But it's really cool how Tolkien describes it, because he had all that power and that light of a man still with him. And this is very like in Glorfindel, it's shown in Galadriel, it's shown these elves being born in a man have a special power, a wrath, a power. It makes them stand out from other people, not being other elves, not being born under the light of the trees, not being as powerful as they are. And he then learns to fight. And this is very, if people like Game of Thrones, this is very Jamie like. Although he wasn't better with the other hand, but his sword hand got cut off, but he learned to fight with his other hand, and he even was better, Tolkien says, because, you know, he was just so stubborn, but also so powerful, that he made it work. So I really like that little information we get about Medros.
Yeah, that it's like you said, very Promethean. The fire symbology, the eagle, the hanging. It's also a little bit. I mean, I'm not a huge mythologist expert, but you know, it reminds me of Odin hanging on the tree and having to give up part of his body
Yeah.
to acquire more wisdom. Which, when he returns
Yeah.
from his imprisonment, Maedhros is shown as
Yeah.
even before he was, kind of one of the ones saying, maybe we should think about this first, Dad.
Yeah, with
Um,
the burning of the ships, he was the
right.
one questioning his father, "Are we really we really doing this?" So,
He's the one that stood aside, but on his return, he's like, he gives Fingolfin the kinship or the kingship. He starts reorganizing his brothers so they'll cause minimal damage. He
yeah.
makes some very pointed quips at Thingol. Like we can see that his pain has, the what he endured, his suffering gives him a little bit of an insight, but it also kind of makes him scary. You were talking about how he's got this light in him. The fire burns so brightly in him that he was able to heal and come back and learn to kill harder with his left hand than he did even with his right. His right hand, of course, the one that would have committed the kinslaying, being actually like cut off of him, if you want to go all like symbolic
Yeah.
on it. um
So he
so his
cleaned himself in a way, It
in
was
a
his
way,
cleanse.
but he's also it says, Galadriel and Glorfindel, they have this wrath, this ability they can draw on, but it's sort of this clean thing,
Mhm.
whereas Maithros is, it says that he's shadowed by pain. You can look at him and you can still see that he's haunted, and
Yeah.
orcs flee from him because he's just so terrifying. So he's
Mhm.
just animated by this, on the one hand, very level-headed, and of all his brothers, the one that consistently makes the best decisions, but on the other hand, just consumed almost like it's kind of like when Frodo's in Rivendell,
Mhm.
having been pursued by the Nazgul and wounded
Yes.
with the Morgul blade, and Gandalf looks at him, kind of seeing him
Oh, yes.
on that spiritual plane, and says he's kind of, to me, he almost looks translucent. By the end of this, he may become like completely like just a vial full of light or a glass full of light, and you'll just be
Yeah.
able to see it radiating out of him. I
Yeah.
think that the same thing for Maithros, but like in a scary way. Like the fire is burning through the cracks, and you can kind of see his
Yeah.
being is being consumed in this,
Is he the one with
ultimately.
the Silmaril in the volcano?
Yes.
Makes
Yes.
sense.
Spoilers, not really. Everyone knew that at some point a Silmaril and a
Yeah.
Feanorian were going to end up in some sort of lava
Yeah.
bath. It's
So
just,
that makes complete sense.
yeah. Anyway, I do. Mythras is my boy, and Maglor. They're very sweet. Evil, but sweet. And I just wish that they would have made some better choices with their lives. And then the rest of the Feanorians, I just like to watch, just like it's like a soap opera to me. It's like, oh, what are you gonna do now? Betray your cousin, and
But out of the goodies, just because we've been talking now about all of them, Fingolfin, Finrod, Finafe, like who's your
Mhm.
favorite of the
like
goodies?
of the
Not the
of the
fan.
good ones.
Yeah.
Uh, hmm. I do like Finrod quite a bit.
Mm.
I also really like Fingolfin. I think that
Yeah.
his ability to, honestly, because he's Feanor's brother, and he's the one closest to him in age. He's got a sister as well, but like we've said, we don't really see much of her. So this would have been, the closest familial relationship that Feanor
Yeah.
had. And of course, Feanor seems pretty determined to screw it up at every turn, but Fingolfin just keeps trying. He's like,
Yeah.
no, we're
Yeah. He
supposed
doesn't
to
give
be a
up.
family. We're supposed to be there for each other. And so, that's what I'm going to do, even though I can see that. So I think for Fingolfin, like, that relationship mattered a lot, even though he never really got any reciprocity out of it, and it kind of
It's
ruined
like
his
with
life.
Morgoth and Mandos. I think you said it even last time. It's very similar. Like Mandos doesn't understand. How can he be so evil? Like he doesn't understand this concept. You have a feeling like Fingolfin also. It's like, what?
Yeah, like how can, eventually he's going to come around, right? Like I
Yeah.
got to keep, I can't give up on him. I got to keep trying.
Yeah.
That's what siblings do. It's like Fingolfin, it's
Yeah.
time to accept that ship has sailed. It has literally sailed, and it is on fire.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. Fingolfin is he's my
yeah.
man.
And when he finally just breaks at the end and goes charging in to destroy Morgoth, you read
That's
it. It's like it's one of the great
yeah.
epic battles in
Yeah, and
all
he
of
goes
modern
alone,
literature.
that's he doesn't want anyone else to die. Like he's like, no, this is enough now. I'm challenging this monster. That's so brave. I love that.
Yeah, he has to have had at least an inkling that things were probably not going
Of
to end well
course,
for him. But
of course,
yeah,
but he wanted to send a message.
Yeah, he couldn't tolerate anymore the idea
No.
that he was just going to
Yeah.
have to sit there and watch his people and his
No.
family just be
Yeah.
slowly picked apart. He was like, if I
Yeah.
can end this, however unlikely it is, I have to try.
And he proved you can wound him and probably kill him, because he was the
Yes.
first one that kind of proved that, and that kind of later on, gave Earendil and the host of the good, like, yeah, we can defeat that
Yeah,
monster.
Morgoth coming forward is portrayed as, well, he doesn't really want to, but he feels
No,
like
he
he
has
can't lose.
to.
Yeah, he feels like he can't lose face. He's like, well, I've got to prove that I'm still the
Yeah.
unconquerable and the mighty, but like, this guy's really mad. So,
Yeah.
the fact
Just
that
like Sauron, he was not a warrior. They were scheming, jealous, all that stuff. They were not warriors, really. They had others working for them, but this time he had to come out. Yeah.
yeah, and at this,
Anyway, that was
yeah,
just I wanted to know who your favorite boy out of the goodies
my
is.
favorite good boy is, yeah. No, it's all pretty. I do like Finrod an awful lot. Fingon's fun, but I feel like I can't.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's a terribly original thinker, but maybe that's
Mm,
unfair. And yeah, Orodrith I have no time for. Yeah, Fingolfin's
please.
pretty solid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
of
mean,
course, like,
Turgon is cool. Turgon
I
is cool.
I do appreciate, and honestly, the Lords of Gondolin, some of them I feel like deserve a lot more attention. Rogue and Glorfindel, obviously, with his sacrifice.
Yeah.
Ecthelion, Tuor's
Clarion of the
amazing.
Fountain, my future ex-husband.
Yes, exactly.
Hello?
Yes, it's fine. Like, in other fandoms, there's some concerns like, oh, I'm so and so's wife. It's like, it's easy in the Tolkien fandom because you can be wife to as many as you want. You'll just be a widow because
Yeah.
they all die. It's not.
True.
There's no commitment. Just go ahead
No,
and,
you can just go from
yeah,
one to another.
espouse them all. It's like Pokemon. Um,
Okay.
no, all right, yeah, maybe a bit too far.
That happens when two girls talk Tolkien,
Yeah,
people.
we need a Noldor trading card game. That is my conclusion. So here we are. We've killed pretty much all the Noldor off now. We have
Yeah.
Turin dooms Nargothrond. That's mostly Turin's story.
Yeah. Folds.
Finduilas deserves better, but she ends up slain in the sack of Nargothrond. Orodreth dies in
Yeah.
Nargothrond. We've covered that Gondolin has been sacked. There's no more Doriath because the Sons of Anor saw to that, and much good that did it do them. Not any good at all, actually. They're in worse condition than they were before.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the only thing that remains of the Noldor and of the High Elves at all is the Havens of Sirion, where we have the remnant from Gondolin escaped there to the coast. They joined Elwing, who's the granddaughter of Luthien.
Mm-hmm.
And she has the Silmaril. She's the one with the Silmaril. So their people kind of meet at the coast at the Havens of Sirion, and they are realizing, we can hide here. We can't hold out here forever. What we really need to do is we need some intervention from Amon. We need the Valar need to intervene. We've tried and we've failed, and we obviously can't do it. Idril and Tuor actually go sail into the west to try and solicit help, and we don't really see them again, but the legends state that they did come to Amon, but their suit wasn't heard, but they were allowed to live there, so apparently they're fine, but it didn't work. Their attempts to get help didn't work.
Yeah.
And
which is
so
kind of a cool story because, Tuor actually, he would have died. He was immortal, but going to Aman, maybe he was granted immortality, whatever happened. I think in my head, they're still together. Like, Arendil's parents are still a thing sailing somewhere around some island that was given to them.
Well, Tuor in particular was so associated with the Noldor, and he lived as one of them for so many years. He's one of the most elvish human characters, even arguably more so than more so than Turin.
And
So
Glorfindel
he's
was re-embodied for his deeds in that war, in the fall of
yeah,
Gondolin, right? So why not give immortality to Tuor? I don't think that would be
and
out of the.
and I just like it because Idril and Tur, they're the functional couple.
Yeah,
They're the ones without the angst and without the, they
yeah,
stay together and nobody's dying tragically and nobody's
yeah,
betraying anyone and no one's
yeah,
being impersonated by Sauron. It's like, no, they love each other and they have a kid and they try to do right by each other and by their people.
yeah.
And it's like, we deserve at least one couple that
Mhm.
makes it out of this wreck fairly
And
intact.
again, not interwoven in the Silmaril thingy,
Yes.
so they are clean out. That's not part of their story, so they don't die in my canon.
Yeah, even Turin and Hurin get involved with the
Yeah,
Naglafring, which is,
yeah,
ultimately that's what encases the Silmaril. So
yeah,
so
yeah,
even they kind of get touched
yeah,
on with that whole mess.
yeah.
But yeah, Tuor is totally clean of that, and Idril, as you pointed out, half Van Yaren, more than half Van Yaren, if we're gonna go
Well,
back to being descended
mm,
from Indus on her father's side.
yeah.
She kind of ducks that as well, being
Mhm.
an elf of extraordinary nobility, as if you will.
Yeah. And
Um,
foresight. Listen to
yes,
Israel, please.
very important. So I think we can finish the first stage.
Yes.
Yes, we can say that Eärendil sails into the west, following his parents, I guess not footsteps because they're on an ocean, but following his parents, um, trying to seek Valinor, which has been hidden and is surrounded by these reefs and whirlpools and things. He leaves behind his wife Elwing, who's, like I said, granddaughter of Luthien, half elf herself, or sort of
Mhm.
mixed elvish and human heritage, and
Mhm.
their sons, Elros and Elrond, who are very important later on. They're very young at the time.
Mhm.
I know they're babies. Like they don't
Yeah, and they
even.
leave them behind.
That's a
Yeah,
sticking point for a lot of people. But I mean, I think it's
the
the kind
greater
of
good was at stake.
yeah, and Elwing is stays behind with the children, and Arundel goes. He says, "I'm going to go try and find help," basically,
Yeah,
because we can't stay here forever. So he sails to the west. He doesn't make it. He is turning around to come back.
yeah.
Meanwhile, those pesky Feanorians have said,
Mm.
"Oh, we missed the Silmaril the first time. Here it is in Syrian. There's Luthien's descendant who has it. Let's attack them
Yeah.
next." So they do, and of course, Syrian is full of refugees and women and children and the wounded and the unarmed, and they come upon them by surprise, more or less, and it's a bloodbath. And
Mm.
Elwing, running to escape what I can only imagine was just this conflagration of awfulness, jumps off a cliff with the Silmaril. Basically, they're coming after her. She knows that they're gonna, either kill her and take it, probably just most likely kill her and take it from her.
Mhm.
And she's probably assuming, I'm guessing at that point, that her sons have been separated from her, are already dead. So
Yeah.
I think in this act of defiance, I kind of give her credit for this. I know a lot of people have a problem with it, but I think, to her in that moment, she thinks she's going to die no matter what she does. She's
Yeah.
cornered. She's, alone. They're closing in on her. All of her people are, being killed, and she still has the Silmaril. And she's
Mhm.
like, well, they're not going to get it from me. So she jumps into the ocean, and in one of the more what the heck just happened moments in Tolkien, Ulmo turns her into a seagull.
Yeah.
So she
Oh, is it
does.
a seagull?
I
It's
believe. I believe it's a seagull.
really. I thought in the German version it's something else, but
Oh,
okay.
maybe it's
Yeah.
different in translation because Tolkien's very
Yeah.
big on the gulls.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
crying of the gulls. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
into a bird, into a winged beast.
Yes.
I swear it's a seagull, but I will double check.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't
Um,
worry.
so as a bird with the Silmaril still somehow, I'm guessing maybe around her neck. I don't know. What is the
Yeah.
airspeed
Uh,
velocity of an
I think
unladen
most of
Elwing?
the. I think on her head or something.
Could be bound to her brow, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think, like, it's still in the necklace at this point, I think. So I'm getting way too I'm thinking way too hard about, but how did she get anyway, the point is she flies across the sea with the Silmaril, carrying it somehow, gripping it by the husk, I don't know, and finds Eärendil and
Yeah.
transforms back into her lovely self. And now Eärendil has the Silmaril,
Yeah.
which turns out to be very important because, Elwing basically says, well, there's nothing back for us back home. Our sons have probably been murdered. So let's go with your plan and continue trying to sail west.
Yeah.
And now that he has the Silmaril and the Blood of Luthien by his side, he actually makes it past the reefs and into the city and the capital, and it's deserted, and he makes his plea, and the Valar issue forth to kind of destroy Morgoth, and in the process kind of destroy all that's left of that realm, because Morgoth's power is so deep. It's just infused in the very land itself. It's corrupted the waters, it's corrupted the beasts. So they basically have to kind of Noah's Ark and just flood the whole place to purify it and start over.
Yeah.
So this is the exciting part for me because, of course, Elrond and Elros don't die. They get adopted.
Yeah.
They get adopted by the Feanorians.
Yeah, and this is really cool if you think later on what happens with Aragorn and a lot of, because he fosters a lot of the Dunedain
Yeah.
heirs, basically. And this is really cool because he kind of was fostered as well. And you would think, like it's not like the princess in the tower.
Right.
It's actually I don't know what kind of father was Medros, but yeah, he was a father to them.
Yeah, it says that Maglor in particular finds them and says, we got to take care of these kids. This is our fault, and they're orphans and they're completely vulnerable. We need to step up here. And Maedhros, I think, is a little traumatized by the last time he tried to save elven twins from a horrible kinslaying related death. And he's, I think, a little bit more reluctant, but they both take good enough care of Elrond and Elros that they turn out to be decent human beings. Which is amazing considering all of the things that they had to endure before they were like 6 or 7 years old. And I think Elrond does.
Where they lived though during that time, because as you said, a lot of the places were destroyed. Where did they grew up with them? Where was the base of Maglor and Medros at that time? I tried to find that out when I was writing the Noldor video, but I couldn't.
I've looked into it. I can't find a good explanation.
Because it wasn't in Linden, it wasn't not in Harlinden.
Before they attack Syrian, they're just wandering. It says that they're a wild and woodland folk. They just kind of move around from camp to camp, so it could easily be that. Another, contender is they could have found, one of their abandoned fortresses and reclaimed it, depending. But I mean, that I think you'd have to guess. I think what probably is most supported by the writing is that they wander, unless there's something. Again, I've tried to find a good answer to this, but
which would make it more tragic, like wander around with these two little children and not really having a home. Yeah, it would fit,
in the woods, being raided by orcs and constantly on the watch, and probably hard struggling to find food, and now you've got children. This is your punishment. The doom and the everlasting darkness. Yeah, no, whatever. You have to raise toddlers.
Yeah, not from your line, from your father's stepbrother's line. He basically cast.
And from a notoriously stubborn line. They have Thingol on the one hand and Baron on the other, and it's just like you know that the tantrums must have been legendary.
Yeah, it's really cool.
But so that's kind of, I'm tracing like you said, the lines of the royal house of the Noldor. They start off with so many potential descendants, and they end up with very few. So we have, Elrond being Torgon's heir through his father, and Elros similar. I think they're twins, so I don't know who's technically the oldest, but Elrond and Elros.
Elrond, just because he chose the elven fate and his
exactly.
brother.
I think that's kind of the assumption there. But so we have Elrond and Elros. We have Gil-galad of the mysterious parentage up, being fostered. I think he's in Valar when news comes of Turgon's death, and someone comes to him and says, "Well, you're High King of the Noldor now," and he's like, "High King of the who? Like, there's 5 of us left."
Yeah.
So, and I think he's with Círdan at this
I
point.
think so. Yes, I think so.
So
Yeah.
he doesn't even have his own,
No.
realm. He's
No.
kind of a guest of Círdan in a realm of Teleri, and
Yeah. He basically found and goes to Linden
yeah,
afterward. Yeah.
yeah. So we've got Finduilas is dead. We have Gil-galad. We have Elrond. We still have Galadriel. God bless her.
She's the
She's
only. Yeah.
still trucking.
Yeah. And we have Glorfindel, because my theory is 1,000% correct, that he's Irime's son. So therefore, he's also from that line. So it's Fingolfin and Finarfin's sister. So he's
Mhm.
they are his uncles. A
Yes.
thousand
So
percent.
definitely completely canon. You can look it up at any point. You won't find anything that contradicts it. In fact, so for me,
Exactly. Call me.
that's
I'll
that's
convince
gospel.
you. Yeah.
So and Glorfindel is dead at the beginning of the Second Age, so he's still
Yeah. His re-embodiment is a bit
like
later. Yeah.
he does come back, but he is dead at this point.
Yeah.
Um, so like surviving royal Noldor, there really aren't that many of,
No.
and the ones that are left, most of the Noldor after the War of Wrath, after all of their remaining land and territory has
Yeah.
been cataclysmically destroyed, they do accept the pardon of the Valar and say, "Okay, you're right. This was a terrible idea. We'll come home now." And so they sail back. And
Yeah.
oh, we should mention that Finrod gets re-embodied rather quickly,
Hmm.
because he's at some note says that he gets re-embodied and he walks. He walks now with his father beneath the trees in Tirion or something.
And
Um,
probably is with Amarie
oh,
somewhere.
I would imagine if she'll have him back after leaving her in the lurch like that. But I'm sure
Yeah.
they have all of eternity. I'm sure they work something out.
Yeah.
Um, so Finrod is, I mean, kind of an exception, because unlike most of the other Noldor, who you get the sense they're going to have to stay in Mandos for a really long time, meditating on their sins and their
Yeah.
crimes and coming to terms with all of that before they have a chance to be re-embodied.
And do you think Fëanor is even re-embodied? I don't think so, because he literally blew up in flames. And I don't think he's in the halls of Mandos.
It's, I mean, I don't think we ever find out for certain. He swore the oath that if he failed to get the Silmarils back, then, let me be turned out beyond the circles of the world into the
Yeah.
void, essentially into everlasting darkness. So if
Yeah.
that holds true, if
Yeah.
that's something he can do to himself, there's limits on, like when Muriel decides to die, she can't just decide to die. So, but if the oath holds true, and so far it
Yeah.
seems to have in all other particulars,
Yeah. I
then
mean,
yeah,
we can
he.
ask Miriel. She's meanwhile Miriel in Aman, literally weaving all the bad deeds
Mm-hmm.
of her family. Like, just ask her. Just call her. She'll know.
I should. She'll know. I'll get her on the phone. What's the
Yeah.
what's the area code
This is
for
literally the worst. A
Valmar?
mother having to see all that, all these bad decisions, and then making tapestry out of that. Like,
Well,
what?
making, and I think the idea too is, a little bit, I mean, kind of, this is her, again, I don't want to say punishment, but this is sort of the
Yes.
result of her decision.
Yes, it is. And
You
she
want to,
can't interfere. She can't do anything because she chose not to be in a boat, not to be alive, basically. She
right,
wrote herself out of history.
she chose not to, raise her son, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to get down too hard on her, but that was a decision she made, to leave her family behind, to say, I don't want anything more to do with you. So then to see what the results of her lack of influence were, when maybe she could have changed things if she had stuck around, or
Yeah.
um and it's like, it goes back to that thing of, if Muriel hadn't died, a lot of the strife would have been avoided. But if Muriel hadn't died, we wouldn't have Fingolfin, and we wouldn't have Finrod, and we wouldn't have Galadriel or Idril or Turgon. Like, we would miss out on the richness that was added by those specific characters being, coming into the world the way that they were. So Even the
Yeah.
Valar are like, yeah, I mean, this was a bad decision, but I don't know if the world would have been better overall because we would have missed out on so much greatness,
Yeah.
which is kind of the Noldor in a nutshell. It's like bad decisions, but so epic. So are we really unhappy about them in the end? I don't know. Probably
No,
yes.
they make
Probably we're
this is
still
the so
unhappy.
look, we've been talking about for hours about them. They make such epic stories, and yeah, and I like that everything is interwoven with each other. That makes it even better and thought through, and yeah. But let's end the first age. War of Wrath, good wins over evil, and then the second, and the world changes, and
Oh
looks different
yes.
now. Yeah, and then a few, I mean, a few Noldor are left, but what I find super interesting, I've just written the Teleri video, and actually a lot of Teleri obviously are now left in Middle Earth, and they seek refuge because, as I said, a lot of the realms have been destroyed in the War of Wrath, like dragons fighting in the sky and Melkor doing his volcanic eruptions and everything. The world as we know it from the First Age basically is destroyed, and all the fortresses we talked about it gone, everything gone. So there's just this little piece near the coast actually that still survives, and well, it's ruled by then Gil-galad, partly, who took over the kingship in Lindon, and then there's below that there's Harlinden, and yes, there are Noldor left, but there are a lot of Teleri, but they didn't want to be ruled by a Noldor king like ever, but they needed the refuge because there was nowhere else that was really safe. And so this is really interesting, I find, because then a Noldorian king actually kind of ruled over Teleri.
Sorry, I was muted for a second.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the Noldor too, had fractionated. We can see this as, Fingolfin was the one that united them for a time as High King, but then, very quickly that's like, well, Fingolfin's the High King, but there's a lot of kings and princes and lords under him, and, people start to identify as the people of this guy or the people of that guy, and then Fingolfin dies, and that all gets worse. So the Noldor are just this, like, they don't really have a political. They
No.
have Gil-galad, and he, everyone who basically wants to continue to identify as
Yep.
Noldor.
But Galadriel leaves, she doesn't really put herself under his rule. She kind of, goes
Well,
east.
Galadriel's kind of already. I mean, I think in one version, by the time the time the War of Wrath happens, she's already crossed the mountains into um, what is going to be Middle Earth of the Second Age.
Yeah, but she's with the Gwaith Armyrdain in the
Yeah.
Second Age.
Well, she's even before Gil-galad, kind of founds his kingdom and says, "Okay, I mean, I guess I'm High King
Yeah,
of the Noldor." She's already kind of noped out. She's
yeah,
left that behind and said,
yeah,
I'm not gonna sit here and argue over who's High King or Queen or Prince or Princess or whatever of the Noldor.
yeah,
This is an old argument. I'm tired of having it. There's plenty of stuff out here that I can do, and
yeah,
plenty of people out here that I can lead. Less concerned about that title thing and more interested in just what actual practical things can I accomplish. So
yeah.
she wanders around a lot.
She
She's
does.
but
Yes.
she starts out in the Far East,
Mhm.
not the far east, but farther east, farther inland, compared to Gil-galad.
Yeah.
So she's there, not kind of very explicitly not setting up a Noldoran kingdom. Very, we've talked about this before. Very, very carefully not presenting herself as, a Noldoran queen here to rule all you
Over
Avaran
Teleri.
and Sindarin and Sylvan, scum. Uh, and we have, descendants of Doriath and the Sindar as well, kind of looking askance at Gil-galad. They don't really even want anything to do with him, even though he's not of a line that would have directly come into conflict with theirs. And he seems to have really didn't really do much during the First Age because he wasn't really, like you said, he should have been 8th or 9th down in the line of succession, and just everyone else got killed above him.
Yeah.
So he's pretty inoffensive as far as Noldor go, but they're just so jaded that they, refuse to hardly deal with him,
Yeah.
reluctant to come to his aid because they've
Yeah.
just been so burnt by the Noldor and their constant conflict and bickering.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll talk about all them later, but Gil-galad's really got, a handful of people of, presumably some of Círdan's people. He remains pretty close in friendship with Círdan.
Yeah.
He's the one who ends up with custody of Elrond.
Mhm.
Elros goes west to found Numenor, and Elrond sort of joins up with Gil-galad. Um, and then, yeah, we've got Galadriel in the east, and then one other very important descendant of the one very important descendant of Finwë that we kind of skipped over, which is Celebrimbor, the son of Curufin, the son of Feanor. So Feanor's grandson is living near Galadriel at this point. This is
Mhm.
where things get interesting, I think.
Yeah. No, because just like his father, he forged objects of high importance.
Yeah, he's a smith. I mean, I think we mentioned earlier that
His
um,
father, yeah,
Curufin doesn't really, I don't think, have anything to his name, but Celebrimbor is a smith, and he's mentioned as, having great skill and great talent, and he, starts to make friends with the dwarves who have also kind of become refugees and have escaped to
yeah,
their ancestral homeland in the east, Khazad-dûm, which will later be called Moria.
hmm
And yeah, they're starting,
and
this friendship.
yeah. Yeah, and I really like that because in the beginning we learn the Noldor are very close to the dwarves. This is what Tolkien tells us, because they like Aule is their master in a way and teaches them a lot of things, and this plays out here in Celebrimbor and Navi, I think, building the West Gate of Moria and these things, and them actually during that time being friends, allies, however you want to call it. And what I really like is the similarities between Morgoth whispering in the ear of Feanor and him, Morgoth claiming um, he aided in the in building, in creating the Silmarils because of all the things he taught Feanor. And then Sauron very similarly mirrors this with the last living descendant of Feanor, making him and adjusting him and aiding him in creating the rings of power, which is so cool.
I mean, the parallelism is really cool. It's also really, you would think that Celebrimbor of all people might know better at this point, and when he like rejects his father, for instance, and says this is the fruit of
Yeah,
the oath and it's evil and I can't follow you anymore,
yeah,
I'm gonna support Finrod and acknowledge Orodreth, and I'm not coming with you into exile. We're done.
yeah, yeah,
Um, you think that, like, okay, good, he's showing some sense. He realizes that he shouldn't, always just impulsively follow his pride, and that
yeah,
his, affection for the works of his hands can be corruptive. And you think,
yeah,
great, like this is promising. Um, but I think he's maybe a little bit too innocent for his own good, because
yeah.
Sauron comes to him with this proposal of, we can make Middle Earth just as good as Valinor ever was.
Great again.
Um,
Let's make Middle Earth great again.
yes, and let's, we can make it beautiful, and the elves can see that time is passing faster, that they're losing power, that men are multiplying, and
Yeah,
it seems like things are going backward, and they've, everyone's suffered horrible losses, and they, everyone's mourning the loss not only of probably their family and their friends, but also their homelands and their cities, and these great Nargothrond, Gondolin, Menegroth, these names that are passed down in history
yeah,
as these just beautiful, blessed places where people could learn and had great skill. And so this is what Sauron is, not under the name of Sauron, of course, under the name of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he's just here to help, guys, I promise. This is what he's holding out as an offer: is we can reclaim all of that. This doesn't have to be the end. And Celebrimbor falls for that hook, line, and sinker, and they start to create the Rings of Power. The idea behind the Rings of Power being that they can make all this happen faster, that they can slow the destructive damages of time, and
Yeah.
give people the power that they need to affect their will in Middle Earth very quickly.
Yeah.
And needless to say, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
This is um,
Mhm.
terrible, terrible decision on Celebrimbor's part. Sauron forges the One Ring. We all know how that goes. With the One Ring, he can influence and control everything the other ring bearers do, and he, except for the three
Mhm.
elven rings that are the ones that Celebrimbor made himself free from any taint of Sauron, free from his input. So those ones are tied somehow to the One Ring, we know, because if the One Ring is destroyed, then they lose their power.
Yes. Because they were made in the thought of, okay, this is now a secret project on the side to, because something dodgy is going on, and there's this one ring, because Celebrimbor hears telepathically Sauron speaking the engravings of the ring, right? He hears
Oh,
him saying
does he
it.
hear him? I
I
think
think
he
so.
might. Yeah.
I think
Yeah, I
he
think
hears.
is that Unfinished Tales, or they
Yeah, some, yeah.
they
It's
or
not in the
maybe
Lord
it's
of the Ring books. It's, yeah,
yeah.
but it's somewhere. He hears him say it, and this is when he realized, oh wow,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is obviously, if you create something to not really fight something, but having something else in mind, and put magic, you made just your magic videos, and then put magic
Hmm.
into these objects, then obviously they're connected to each other, because action reaction.
Yeah, this is something that is pretty explicit in Tolkien. We see it with Feanor and the Silmarils. We see it even with, Yavanna and Aule and the two
Yeah.
trees and the dwarves themselves. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of something passes into you, a little bit of your power passes into the things that you make,
Yes.
sometimes to the point where damage to that thing will
Would do damage
damage
to
you.
you. Fëanor saying breaking the Silmarils would break his heart, or him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so so the three elven rings being the rings that were made just with Celebrimbor's power passing into them, and nothing of sort of Sauron's essence. I don't like
Yeah.
saying essence when I talk about Sauron. It sounds like it would be very gooey. Just like this dark, slimy thing.
And I also think, like, the three Silmarils were the masterpiece of Fëanor, the three
Mm-hmm.
elven rings, because he's been crafting all those 9 rings for men, 7 rings for dwarves. He's been crafting a lot of rings and learning a lot, and so the three elven rings are also like his masterpiece, the height of his power, I think. Yeah, just like the Silmarils are for Fëanor.
Yeah, I think even Gandalf says something like the earliest rings were just sort of attempts and ways to learn about it, but the
Yeah,
three were sort of his masterwork.
yeah,
And like the Silmarils, they have a very complicated legacy.
yeah.
So
And it's three, like,
yeah,
coincidence.
well, three is always a yeah. Three
Tolkien
is
likes numbers. Tolkien just likes
yeah.
7 swans, 7 gates. Like, his numbers are really important in Tolkien's legendarium.
Yeah, and three is one that the three elven peoples of the elves. We also have three hobbit
Three houses
people,
of
three of the
men.
three houses
Yeah,
of men, the three Silmarils.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, lots of three
Symbolism.
significance there, and
Mhm.
the parallel between the rings of Celebrimbor and the Silmarils of Feanor.
Yeah.
Um,
And the
is
power of what the rings stand for, and the Silmarils end up in, one Silmaril ends with Elwing in the air, one Silmaril ends in fire, one Silmaril ends in water. There's the ring of water, there's the ring of fire, basically, and there's the ring of air. So
yeah,
they even, and so the Silmarils, where they end up in, is what the ring's power is, basically.
yeah, they have. Oh, you wonder too, because they are named that. It's with the Silmarils. There's a prophecy that one will end up in
Yeah,
air and one will end up in the water, but we
yeah,
don't know which of them. I think the
yeah,
three Silmarils are pretty interchangeable,
yeah,
but the Elven rings, of course, have different gems. They're named
yeah,
Narya, Nenya, Vilya, the
yeah.
ring of air, the ring of water, the ring of fire. So you wonder if Celebrimbor named them that almost in an homage.
Yeah. No,
Like,
yes, and the thing is, Elrond has the ring of air, and that is his father and his mother, up in the sky, and Eärendil with Vingilot, then later on, and being the star and whatnot. So the Cimmeral in the sky is the ring the son of the dude in
yeah.
the sky even owns and has, which is really cool.
Yeah, and then I guess if we were gonna stretch it, Galadriel with Nenya, her family kind of associated with water and the
Larry.
Teleri and all of that, and Narya is kind of an interesting choice because it does eventually come to Gandalf, but
Yeah.
Gandalf's kind of a fiery fellow even
Of
before he
the
gets Narya.
secret fire, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and he with his fireworks and his smoke and his all of
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
yes, yeah, that's definitely an element to keep in mind. There's a lot of symbolism about the
Mhm.
rings compared to the Silmarils, and then the elements, and then the people who end up bearing them usually
Yeah.
have some sort of connection back to that.
Yeah.
This is all, yeah. This is all like making me revise all of my forthcoming videos now. I'm like, oh, now I'm gonna have to backtrack and find some more references on that because that's a really interesting point to explore. This is great.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
so thought through because it's not coincidence, people. This is really thought through by Tolkien.
yeah, one or two you could be like, oh, that's an interesting similarity. I wonder if he was thinking, but this is very explicit. It's
Yes.
you can't. It's hard to
Yeah.
escape the
He
fire,
likes
air,
things
water.
repeating. Yeah, he likes
Yeah,
things repeating. Circle of life.
yeah. It echoes it. It echoes back, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what the whole Lord of the Rings is the story of
Yes.
these little hobbits realizing that everything they do echoes back through generations and generations of
Yeah.
kind of variations on the theme, which
Yeah.
Tolkien would probably ascribe to being the theme, literal musical theme of the Ainur.
Mhm.
Um, so poor Celebrimbor and his rings. He makes the three, and they are his masterpiece, and he doesn't want them to fall into Sauron's hand, obviously, because that would be disastrous, so he sends them into hiding. He himself is trying to defend his city, Ostin Eddil, and Sauron comes with his forces and makes short work of that, captures Celebrimbor, and this is on my list of reasons we are upset with Sauron right now. Um, Tortures
Yeah.
Celebrimbor, the whole thing, tries to coerce him into betraying the locations of the three rings, and Celebrimbor says, well, I can tell you about the rest of them, it doesn't matter, because I know that you can already control them, I'm not telling you about the three. So he holds out, he doesn't give in. Feanorian stubbornness coming through for us finally, like being worth something, doing some good in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and Sauron is so upset that in his fury, he kills Celebrimbor and breaks his body and hangs his corpse on a pole to be used as a standard and fills it full of arrows. And then his people march under Celebrimbor's dead, tortured, defaced, arrow-studded body, which is like
Yeah.
the
I
worst.
um I referenced this to, me being from Transylvania. This is actually, well, during the Middle Ages, that was a tactic, you used to give a strong message to your enemies. But this is actually what Vlad the Impaler, the actual Dracula, did, with his enemies. So it's cool. It's a cool image.
Yeah, I can only imagine how disheartening that would be. Here's Celebrimbor, Feanor's descendant, leader of the Gwaithir Myrdain,
Yeah.
the Fellowship of Craftsmen. At one point,
Which is so cool. I
probably,
like these guilds because in
yeah.
Numenor later we'll get the shipping guild as well. I like
Hmm.
these foundations of these guilds. It's really, really cool, especially in the Aldarion and Earendis story in the Mariner's Wife.
Yeah.
You There's a really good description of how he founded the guild and how it worked and how they kind of went to Numenor and built colonies and all that. It's really cool, and I imagine the Gwaith Mirdain, and I think we'll see that in the Amazon show. I'm pretty sure, and
Hmm.
I really want to see. I think that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, it's not just Celebrimbor out here making rings, and we've talked about how he has Narvi and he has
Yeah,
friendship with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, but he
yeah,
also has a considerable number of people,
yeah,
probably most of the remaining Noldor, the ones who didn't
yes,
end up with Gil-galad.
yeah,
He has this whole sort of civilization almost. He's got
he does. Yeah,
the
yeah.
Brotherhood of jewelsmiths who are all
Hmm.
they're kind of they're Middle Earth's last best hope at this point.
Yeah.
They're doing the most. They're the most active group, I think, at this point. That's trying
Hmm.
to redress what they lost in the First Age, and kind
Yeah.
of build a new tomorrow or something. The
Hmm.
problem, of course, is that they're impatient and ambitious and probably a little bit prideful. I don't know if you've noticed in the 4 hours now that we've been talking about the Noldor, but they tend to be just like the slightest bit full of themselves at times. Um,
Which makes them the most human, and this is why Tolkien tells us the most about them, actually.
yes, the most interesting to watch, and the most relatable, understandable, and the most prone to doing things like, I know, I'll just listen to this nice sparkly fellow who's telling me that he knows how to solve all of my problems, and look, it's all working, and look how fabulous we're going to be. Everyone's going to stop and stare when they see what we accomplish, and so it doesn't. Again, the works of the Noldor do not turn out the way that they wanted, and what they begin well turns
Yeah.
to nothing, or turns against them, and would be better if it had never been in the first place.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Celebrimbor's little social experiment is obliterated by Sauron. um Gil-galad is in the position of having to hold him off for most of the Second Age. In one way or another, he's uh trying to forge alliances with Numenor as quickly as he can, but it's rough going. And
Mhm.
Elrond ends up founding Imladris to try and slow the advance of Sauron.
Yeah.
And Galadriel, in the meantime, um,
Which is
ends up with
crazy that Imladris is
yeah,
spilled so late, actually, because it's one of obviously with Thranduil's or Orifa's realm, the Woodland
mhm.
realm, and Galadriel's realm. It's it's cool that, but it's really late in time actually that it's built. You don't have the feeling in the
No,
third
and
age.
the other thing that it's called the last homely house, and it's got the
Yes.
Hall of Fire, and it's this place of stories and lore, and Elrond lives
Yeah.
there, and the food is great, and the hobbits, oh, when I die or when I retire, I'm just going to go back
Yeah.
to Rivendell and live out the rest of my days there. It's you lose the realization that it was built as a fortress to
Yeah.
defend a pass, and it's the reason it's so hard to find is because they literally had to hide it and make it as secret and defensible and impregnable as they could, because it was sort of this, Elrond is trying to hold off these forces, and he needs to have a place he can retreat to, basically, that he
Mhm.
can defend. So
Yeah.
um yeah, by the end of the Third Age, it's like this kind of nice stopover place where the visiting dwarves go when they're journeying back and forth to Erebor. But it starts as this, in grand Noldoran tradition, probably learned some tips from his foster parents,
Mhm.
a fort to try and stop the onslaught of Sauron and the forces of darkness, essentially.
Mhm.
So it's, at least in origins, very rugged. um
Mhm.
so we lose by the end. So we have Galadriel,
Yeah.
and she's in an interesting position, and this is where part of the problem comes in with there being so many different versions. And
Mhm.
frankly, this is not, I get lost with all of these.
Mm.
I can't keep track of what timeline she's supposed to be in, and where she's supposed to be in, with whom, and for what reason.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
tangle.
Yeah. But
um
she's been literally has she was in Doriath, all the like she literally was everywhere. I think Matt actually has a really good video about that because he does from Nerd of the Rings. Shout out to you, Matt. We love Matt. And he has, because he always uses the maps, and he has a really good Galadriel video with the maps that explain where she went chronologically. So check that out. It's a good video on her travels.
yeah, Nerd of the Rings with the maps and the
Yeah.
animations has
Yeah. It's really
clarified so much in my life. It's
yeah.
a very good resource.
Yeah.
So Galadriel's been doing some moving around. Now importantly, she, when Anatar, Sauron, comes to her and makes these same overtures of, hey, you
Mm,
want a great realm, I can give you a great realm, we can work together, we can make something beautiful.
yeah.
She gets a bad feeling. I don't think she knows it's Sauron, because if she
No,
knew
she
that,
doesn't. Yeah,
then she would take action.
yeah, she would.
But
Because
she
he killed her father. No,
her brother,
her brother. Sorry, not her
Finrod.
father.
It's all
Brother.
right.
Yeah,
No, it's all
yeah,
good.
yeah. Sorry, it's
Too
late.
many Finns.
Yeah. So obviously she knows who he is, and she's probably out for revenge. And that is also very important to have in mind, thinking of the third age later on, her destroying the fortress and all that. Again, he killed her brother. So yeah, she had her own agenda fighting Sauron. But she didn't
Yeah.
know. She knew something that, again, I think is the Vanya in her. She
Hmm.
knew something was off. And I think she left because, and I think this is what we will see in the show play out, that we will see her and like Celebrimbor being still very trusting of Sauron and being like, oh no, but he's teaching me so many good things. And this is again, love the work of thy hands. That was more important for him. So he easily believed Anatar. And she was more, I don't know. And I think it was not a love triangle or anything. It would be okay for me to see that, but I think she left because they had an argument and over the Sauron thingy, and I think this is why she left.
Yeah, I think some amount of discomfort with the growing influence of this Anatar figure that
Yeah,
she pretty clearly rejects, and from the beginning she senses like, no, this guy's bad news. And I'm sure
yeah,
she and Celebrimbor would have argued about that, or at least discussed it.
yeah, yeah,
And the tensions there remain, of course, Celebrimbor being like, okay, the nice Feanorian, but
yeah,
still a member of that family that she's had some very rough dealings with.
yeah. She didn't like
Eh,
the grandfather. Creep. She knew him.
no, whereas Celebrimbor probably remembers his father and his uncles and his grandfather with a fair amount of pain and shame, but
Yeah.
also probably affection. So, and
The last of that line, he must have been aware of his duty and his heritage. He was again the last of that line, so obviously he must have been something left
yeah,
there.
yeah, he I think
Do you
as
think
well,
he had a family? Because we don't know. It's not said he didn't. Do you think he had a family that was also maybe killed?
that's something that came up in the Shadow of
I
War
know.
video games.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that other people have had similar interpretations as well. It's not unique to Shadow of War, but people
Yeah.
might be familiar with that idea from
Yeah.
that sort of,
Yeah.
that, I guess, verse, that timeline, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, I
Because
I
it would
don't.
make sense. In him, the line continued, so it would make sense. And then Sauron erasing that whole line, finishing what Morgoth couldn't do.
I wouldn't. I guess I wouldn't like be upset if I saw an adaptation with that. I
Yeah.
like the idea, though, that number one, that you know, Feanor has 7 sons. Well, the 7 sons between all of them managed to produce like Celebrimbor, and then like, hey, Dad, I adopted these murder orphans.
Say that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
they did,
Yeah, I know.
like, we adopted them. No, you killed all of their family members, chased their mother off a cliff, and then took them with you. That's abduction. That's not adoption. The
Mm.
distinction is very important. Um, Nardinelle considers them honorary grandchildren. She's so frustrated. But her maternal impulses have just been foiled again and again by her lazy sons.
Oh,
So
Miriel, she's like, oh
there,
yay,
yeah, finally
another
someone who's
another two children more to weave in the tapestry.
yeah. I wonder what horrible things are going to happen to these ones. Better not get too attached to them. Anyway, Celebrimbor and his descendants, or relative lack thereof, he doesn't leave any behind, certainly. And I think I like that. It goes back to that idea that um, they don't have the staying power. There's a certain futility to all of this. Everything
Yeah.
that they start, be that a realm or a great work or a
Yeah.
item or a bloodline, a descendant,
Yeah.
family, it's not going to work out for them. So
Yeah.
whether Sauron kills them all or whether Celebrimbor's just so consumed with his craft that it doesn't even occur to him that he should like maybe stop and look around and go on a few dates,
Yeah.
which is kind of the interpretation that I incline to. It's
But what do you think of the three rings then? Because those were literally the only good that came out of all that, and because yes, you might obviously the nine rings that doomed mankind, and the seven rings that kind of wanted to do made the dwarves greedy at least, and led to kind of the downfall of the what's the dwarves name? I hate dwarves. I don't even like.
Thror?
Fur- What's his name?
Thror?
Thor,
Thror.
whatever, from The Hobbit, that dude.
Yeah.
Um, I don't even want to learn the names. So again, that those rings led to the doom of these people, basically.
Yeah.
But the three didn't. They helped to preserve. They helped to fight off evil. So how do you interpret that? Going with a curse and the work of thy hands shall all be doomed, and
I am severely mistrustful of the elven rings. I think that insofar as they are
mm,
not the work of Sauron, they are not inherently evil. But Sauron, I think, or not Sauron.
but they're
Um,
forged by a
they're
Feanorian descendant, so they must be doomed.
They are, and they're made out of, they do that same thing where it's an act of pride. It's this technology or magic trying to supersede the natural order of things. Tolkien talks in his letters about how the elves of the Second Age wanted to become embalmers. They wanted to preserve the past age and the relics and the history and the
Mhm.
memories and just kind of preserve it and continue to live in this dream world. And in fact, we see that
Yeah,
especially in Lothlorien, that's exactly what the Elven Rings do. And
true. Yeah.
Tolkien portrays this as like, they're trying to conserve something that's beautiful. So that in and of itself is not
But it wasn't
evil.
meant to last,
It,
actually, and they are
yeah,
just. Mm,
it was mistaken, and ultimately it's not healthy for them to live like that. They need to move on, and the world needs to move on. So while the rings themselves, it's kind of like, it's kind of like ibuprofen or pick your
yeah,
drug of choice. You can, it
yeah,
can do some good if there's a problem and it can ease the pain, but to just be
yeah.
taking it all the time, at some point you have to
Yeah.
kind of stop. That's not a perfect metaphor, obviously, but
Yeah, I get no, I understand. Okay, I never thought of it like that because that I always questioned because I was like, but it was built by, the lost living descendant of Fëanor. So, but then it did good in a way. It kept evil at bay till the moment the chosen one, Aragorn, could come, and also other chosen ones like Frodo and Sam, till that time can come. Just like Earendil, Gondolin needed to exist to bring out Earendil. And for me, the preservation of the elven rings and the aid of the three elven rings was exactly that Aragorn could exist and that this time would come to fight off evil once and for all. That's how
yeah.
I saw it. But yeah, what you say
I
makes
think it's
sense.
like in a world where the rings exist, then it's
Yeah.
better to have the three elven rings exist as well than to not. But
Yeah.
it would have been the best possible scenario would have been no rings at all. That they
Yeah.
chose to
Okay.
let the world, that the elves chose to let the world continue to evolve, and they let go of their painful memories and said, let's accept what is, instead of trying to
Mm-hmm.
cling on to what once was.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore the rings, like, they do some good in that they resist Sauron's project of just absolute destruction and subjugation, but they're still
Yeah.
not inherently the best case scenario, I guess, if you
Yeah,
will.
you're right. Yeah, because that's not the course of nature that probably Eru had in mind or the Vala sung into being. Yeah, maybe. But
Yeah,
it
it's
wasn't the time of men. They were not ready at that time, so the rings needed to exist. That's still what I would say, but yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Men
and
were not
and it's
ready at
not
that time. Men were not ready at the second age. You see that in the downfall of Numenor. They were not ready.
well, but the Numenorians were better off near the beginning of the Second Age
Yeah, but
than
the
they later
Numenorians,
became.
yeah, but what happened to Numenor? They got so prideful, they were overpowered with everything, and they had to be belittled by Sauron and taught a lesson, right? And then they literally erased their history. They didn't sing songs about Numenor. They said the prideful, whatever Numenorians, they called the Rangers then later on, or the ones living in Arnor and Gondor, founding the kingdoms. They wanted nothing to do. They literally wanted to erase their whole history and start new. So this shows you they were not ready. They needed to learn their lesson. All this needed to happen for a line to come forward, which should have been in power long ago with Silmarillion. Um, Still banging on that argument. But I think this needed to happen. And for me, the rings were always helping that. But I get what you say. And yeah, I never saw it
and
that way.
And part of the problem, of course, is that we have Sauron actively messing things up, and the
Yes.
influence of Morgoth still acting. So it's
Yeah.
difficult to say,
Yeah.
oh, what should the elves have done? Well, they
Yeah.
shouldn't have listened to Sauron. That's pretty clear. But other than that, it's difficult to say, well, what should they have
No.
done in a perfect world? Well, we don't know because we don't have a perfect world. We have a world
Yeah.
that's
You're right.
besieged. We have
Yeah.
lies and deceit. We have corruption that's spreading. So maybe they probably would have had to take some sort of action, sort of a sacrificing the perfect action for the one that was going to be effective, kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Whether
Yeah.
or not it was the rings, some sort of compromise would probably have had to be made at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we have Sauron, because Tolkien, for Tolkien, a lot of times it's better to do the thing that will guarantee your defeat, and but it's the right thing. This is like with Frodo and and Sam and the Ring. It's better to let Gollum be your guide, even though he's treacherous and he's going to betray you, because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's like that story. Oh, I forgot the name, but when the last Anorian king, was it? I don't really know. When he sailed and he had the chance either to take the easy path or the difficult path, and he chose the easy path. Oh God, I don't have
Oh,
bad in second age stuff, but do you know what I mean?
I
Where
remember.
the ring of Barahir was saved. Um,
Oh, the
that
Ring
is
of
also the
Barahir.
choice of the easy and the hard path.
Yeah, yeah. You take the hard path,
Hmm.
even though it seems like the one that's going to lead to defeat.
Yeah,
Because
I want to look that up now. Sorry, you can. Yeah,
yeah,
keep
go ahead.
talking. I really want to because what was that? Yeah, keep talking. Sorry,
No,
I want to know
um,
now.
yeah. I don't. It's vague. It's ringing a real vague bell. I need to brush up on my
Yeah,
second age as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Um, Noldor though, and
Hmm.
they're this whole problem that they have, that they run into again, where it, it's actively being corrupted by Sauron. So it's hard to lay all the blame at their feet, um, but this ultimately their decision, their mistake was believing Sauron when he said, we can use our magic, essentially, or technology, or our craft.
Hmm.
Craft is probably the best word, because it kind of covers both of those spheres of
Hmm.
technology and magic. It's kind of unclear sometimes which we're talking about. He says
Hmm.
we can use our craft to make our will manifested.
Hmm.
So this is what Sauron kind of operates on, this weakness of the Noldor in particular, and
Yeah.
reinforced by the dwarves, of course. And Galadriel sees right through it. Elrond and Gil-galad, also to their credit, being quite Noldoran themselves, also
Hmm.
see through it. And
Yeah.
yeah, they for Celebrimbor, he doesn't see through it. He falls victim to it. Sauron destroys everything that he's created, apart from the rings, which ultimately do lose their power at the end of the Third Age with the destruction of the One. And that leaves us with, then Sauron goes to Numenor. We won't get into all that he gets up to there. Um, Destroys Numenor, Numenor falls, and the remnants of Numenor, Elendil, his sons, and their people, a fragment, of Numenor's pride and
Yeah.
glory,
Yeah.
They arrive on the shores of Middle Earth, ally with
But
Gilgalad.
the right line now that was given back the power.
Well, yeah, at the cost of, the
I
destruction of
know.
yet another
A whole
continent.
civilization. Yes.
Yes, I'm starting to lose my voice, I think. We should we should at least kill Gilgalad properly. So,
Yeah.
Gilgalad um, allies with Elendil, provides him with aid. Sauron is still, he's been weakened by the destruction of his body in Numenor, but he quickly builds himself a new one. He still has the ring, which is very important. As long as he has the ring, he can pretty much bounce back from anything. So Sauron rebuilds very, very quickly and moves very quickly against the Numenorians,
Yes.
thinking that he's going to, this is going to clean them up. He's got one last little line to extinguish, and then they will be gone, exterminated from the world forever.
Yeah.
This is what triggers the sort of fabled last alliance, which is the last alliance, of course, because
Mm-hmm.
after this, there really is no united or unitable elven presence in Middle
Yeah.
Earth. It does pass over to men at this point.
Yeah. It's time
Um,
of men. Yeah. And they diminish.
So Gilgalad marches. Again, he has trouble, just like all of his forefathers did, getting the Sylvan Elves and the Sindar involved. They are very reluctant to march to war again, but they realize that, okay, this is kind of a different situation than the first stage. So they do
Yeah.
send a significant force. And
Yeah.
Gilgalad and Elendil personally wrestle with Sauron, which I think is almost as awesome as Fingolfin challenging him to
It
single
is. Yes.
combat.
Yeah.
They jump on him. Gilgalad's body is burned by the heat of Sauron's hand, like it's
Yeah.
scorched. That's how he dies, is he's burnt alive by the heat of it. So they're like grappling with him. It's like
Yeah.
you grappling with Sauron. It's only Huon does that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so they
And
defeat
Sauron
Sauron.
was way more powerful at that time. He learned many lessons. Morgoth was gone, but all the evil energy, Morgoth's ring was still in action because Morgoth's ring is the world, is Middle Earth. That all the evil is still in the lands and everything. So this is how I imagine Sauron, and then building the ring. All his power culminating in the ring, magnifying. It's like a magnifying glass. So he must be so overpowered, way more powerful than in the first age Sauron we were talking about.
Yeah, he has gained in power and probably in cunning, learned a few tricks. He hasn't dissipated his power to the degree that Morgoth had when he was setting up to fight Fingolfin.
Because he didn't.
So,
Oh, yeah. And he didn't spread his
yeah,
power like Morgoth did, which was a big mistake, by the way.
right, he kept it. I mean, he focused it into the ring, which
He
magnified his
did.
power. Did,
Yes.
ultimately prove to be his undoing because it created a vulnerability. If
Of
your
course.
power passes into something, then
Yeah.
if you damage that thing, it will damage you as well, and that's
Yeah.
the principle taken advantage of at the end of Lord of the Rings. But
Yeah.
yeah, Gilgalad, to his credit, and Elendil, to his credit, like managed to defeat Sauron in this last alliance. They suffer
Mhm.
massive casualties. They themselves
Yeah.
perish, but
Yeah.
they defeat Sauron, and Isildur takes the ring.
Yeah.
Cuts the ring off from his hand, and without the ring, Sauron cannot rebuild. At least not as
Mm.
fast. He can't use the power of the ring to just kind of start over.
Yeah,
So he
because
has
it is
to,
like what Fëanor said: if you crack open the Silmarils, you'll kind of break me, and this is what happened to Sauron.
yeah, and so this is Gilgalad's death, mirroring not just Fingolfin's but also Finrod's in a way, where he's
Does yeah,
wrestling with
yeah,
Sauron,
yeah,
in on behalf of his mortal allies, and kind of
yeah.
saying, look, I see that kind of you guys are the future and you are where our
Yeah.
hope lies. So I will come to your aid, even though I know that it's, gonna cost
Right.
me
Yeah,
significantly.
yeah,
He also bears a spear, where most of the other Noldoran kings have swords or variants on
yeah,
that. So just going to
yeah.
throw that in there. He bears Aiglos, which is, I think, the only named spear. And
Yes.
it's kind of cool. It's a little,
Yeah.
little different.
I like it that it's not a sword. I really like that. Yes, it's cool. I like all the weapons. Yeah.
I know the weapons are neat. They're just,
Yeah.
some of them have personalities.
I do. Yeah. I mean the evil
Yeah.
swords. Ale.
Yeah.
forged. Just saying. Yeah.
So that's I mean, that brings us into the third age, and we're down to we have Galadriel still hanging on, trying to
Yeah.
make good choices. Well,
The one being the one that was born in, because like Celebrimbor and Elrond and all these players of the second age, they were not born in Aman. She's literally the only one born in Aman left.
right, she's got well, I'm trying to think. Even the high elves who are descended directly from the, very royalist of bloodlines, they wouldn't have beheld the trees themselves personally, and so she's one of those few that has that light of Aman in her.
And
Um,
Glorfindel, her cousin.
Glorfindel, yes. Well, which is interesting because when he's reincarnated, of course, like technically those eyes would not have seen the light of the trees because the trees would have been dead when he's rebodied. But so apparently what I'm saying is because he does seem to have the light.
He does,
Um,
yes. He has the
Apparently
wrath.
it's something that affects sort of the soul and kind of leaves a
Exactly.
permanent mark on it.
And
So
it's the fair, that makes him Glorfindel. It's not the body.
right, the body is sort of the
It's a vessel, like the vessel, or
yeah,
yeah,
especially for elves, it's much less of a thing than it is for men. I think
yes,
men are more closely tied to their bodies, and of course, when
yeah,
mortal bodies perish, the mortal soul has to seek elsewhere. The elven soul has to
yeah.
remain, and
That's why
eventually.
Maglor is still wandering the shores, or his spirit is still wandering the shores.
That's true. I forgot. So we have Galadriel, we have Elrond and his descendants. See, we have through his descendants, the daughter and sons of Celebrian, his
Yeah,
wife, who is Galadriel's daughter. So we have again the bloodlines being
yeah.
united, and she's now, Galadriel's daughter is marrying Eärendil's son to
Yeah.
create this sort
It's
of
just so
line
cool
that
that these lines
it is.
yeah,
Yeah, so Arwen is like the coalescence of all of the Noldor, all of the different lines weaving into her, and then all of the noble lines of the Sindar and Teleria as well. Which is why it's kind of cool that so by marrying Arwen, Aragorn is marrying into like all of the different elven families. He can claim kinship with all of them, literally from Ingwe on down to
yeah.
any of them.
And him being a descendant of the twin brother of her father, I mean, they're very, very loosely related, but still they are related of the same line, which is so cool that, they meet again.
Right, and then out of them sort of springs the new era. We don't know what happens to Elrond's sons. Elrond, of course, sails, takes the boat with Galadriel at the end of the Third Age.
Yeah. I want to
Um,
see them in the show. I so
I
want to see.
I feel like weren't they born in the Third Age though? Because Elrond doesn't marry Celebrian until after the Last Alliance. Because he
Oh,
meets her
yeah,
and he
you're
loves
right.
her, but
Yeah,
he
you're
feels like
right.
he can't.
In wartime, they don't marry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you
I know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm desperately holding out for a Sons of Elrond miniseries.
Hmm. Odd
Um,
elf? Hello?
oh yeah,
Yes.
hot half elves riding around and
Yeah.
like avenging their mother, which we can get into on another occasion.
Yeah.
Um, so Maglar,
Galadriel. Oh, yeah, Maglor. Yeah.
Galadriel. We have Galadriel, and we know we've talked about her a little bit with in the context of the Vanyar um and her situation in the Third Age, where ironically, by getting the ring, it's almost like, then she has to become this stationary figure.
Yeah.
She has to become this, she's focused on protecting her realm and keeping it safe, which means that she's kind of stuck in Lorien. There's not a lot she can do.
Yeah.
Um, Not actively, she's doing a great thing by keeping Lorien just, alive and functioning and is able to sort of influence things from Lorien, but she can't ride forth to war as probably would be her preference a few thousand years ago.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have the question of Maglor, who's I will throw in here because his story is so sad. So, rewind a bit to remember when we talked about the Sons of Feanor making their third kinslaying and sacking the haven at Sirion and chasing Elwing into the ocean and kind of forcibly adopting Elrond and Elros. So the last sort of the youngest Feanorian dies in this attack. So we're left with just Mithras and Maglor, and as we alluded to earlier, they eventually do steal back the other two Silmarils from the Valar themselves at this point. And but
Finally.
I know you can only imagine like this huge sigh of relief, and they get these Silmarils, and they're got to be thinking like, okay, it's over, like we did it. And they go to pick up the Silmarils, and they have become so corrupt that the Silmarils now burn their hands just as much as it ever burned Morgoth's flesh or Karkaroth's flesh. They have become
Yeah.
unclean themselves, and the pain is so bad. And obvious, I would assume the despair is so
Yeah.
bad.
It drives them
You know,
mad, basically.
yeah. So Mithros just jumps into a fiery crevice in the earth, basically a chasm, a volcanic
Yeah.
crack,
Yeah.
and that's where he meets his end, and that's how his Silmaril ends up within the fires of the earth. That's its resting place.
Yeah.
Maglor just throws his into the ocean. He's like, I'm done with it. And he
Yeah.
wanders off into the mists of time, and we don't know ever if he, does he forsake his body? Does he end up dying or fading away or being killed
I
somehow? Or
I
is
don't
he.
think he will be allowed to die. I think his torment is to wander these shores forever in pain and being basically mad.
And he's, referenced early in the Silmarillion after the first kinslaying. He's the one who composes this great lament, the Noldor Lante, the fall of the Noldor.
Yes.
And it's like, bruh, you have no idea what's in store. This is only kinslaying number one. You think this is bad.
Yeah.
So I think that it would be appropriate that he kind of becomes, just as Muriel has to chronicle everything in her tapestries, Maglor has to sing, he's got to continue this lament of just, probably adding chapters as he goes and then my nephew Celebrimbor made some really poor choices as well, and now he is hanging on a stick. And so that's kind of, I think, I'm sorry, Maglor, but I think thematically it's very appropriate that his fate as the first person to sort of start chronicling and commemorating the downfall of the Noldor from what they once were, he has to witness the whole process play out and continue to sort of memorialize it in song, even as everyone else is sort of free to forget and move on. Poor Maglor. He really did deserve better, because I think he's one of the ones, along with Mithros, that consistently was like, guys, this is bad, we should stop, can we make this not be so bad? And then I think I am out of Noldor. They're all dead.
Yeah. Well, Galadriel,
Yeah.
still roaming around, and Glorfindel in a way, but we don't know. Yeah, it's a very good Greek tragedy. They all basically die in the end.
They all die, and they all fall through some,
Some got their
recklessness or stubbornness or attachment to their own sort of will.
Yeah, but I like that even those who partook, in the flight and everything, redeemed themselves. Some didn't, and that's what makes it. It's not. I like that in the end, not everybody was painted as a goodie, and songs were sung about. I really like that some, kept to their oath, which in a way also is important. That because they really stick. Not all of them, like you very often mentioned, were evil. But their father, who was really important for them, and mom stayed back in Valinor, didn't go with them, and so it was important. They were a family, and they really liked each other. You have the feeling, and they stick with their father, till like Fingolfin stick to his brother. They stick to their father, and you see the power Feanor had over their hearts, and it makes it even more tragic, but still.
Yeah, I think the Feanorians kind of illustrate this principle that we see echoed throughout the whole family, that they're unwilling to accept that things have forever changed. I think that moment when the trees are destroyed and the Silmarils are taken and their grandfather is killed, I think for them it's like, no, we can still fix this. We can still fix this. We can go back to the way things were. We can make it all better. And they just get so committed to that, as the list of bad things builds, as the list of their terrible deeds builds, they become more and more committed to this idea of we just have to keep going, we have to keep going because this can't be our legacy.
No.
And the only way out of that is to accept that, well, yeah, this is at least part of your legacy, and the only way to move past it is to stop obsessing over it
Yeah.
and move on, accept
And we
defeat.
and we see that something is off in all those kings. Why were there literally like 10 high kings of the Noldor? And this is what I said. Finwë, I don't think was a good king. And you see, he didn't stay king of the Noldor. All the other, I mean, Thingol got killed, but that was another reason he did that. There weren't thousands of kings of the Teleri or Sindar, same like all were. And same with Ivania, with Ingwe. Like Ingwe was always the high king, because yes, first of all, he stayed back in Amman, but still, and he was a good king because we don't hear anything else. We hear of all these bad kings here, and even with Gil-galad, like something was off because the Teleri that or the Sindar or Woodland realm or whoever, they didn't follow his order. They then literally got slaughtered because they refused to put themselves, because of the king slaying, under his order. So there were really many, many bad decisions, many bad kings. And I think Tolkien also shows this in this always changing. Then this one took over, then this, and it didn't work. Like, it's tragic, and the other two from the other two clans or houses or whatever you want to say, they stayed kings till the end, basically, which is a good sign and a sign of a good kingship. And the other ones couldn't hold a throne for I don't know how long.
Yeah, I mean, Ingwe and Olwe definitely, I think, had a more stable populace and a probably better organized rule, and the Noldor often end up shooting themselves in the foot, or
Yeah.
the sins of the father end up visited on the sons, as we see with that. Like I said, I don't think Gil-galad personally did anything wrong, but he sort of inherited all of the bad deeds of his
Yes.
family members, in that no
Yeah.
one was willing to trust him, and
No.
possibly with good reason, even though he himself, I think, I am unaware of any atrocities that he
No,
committed
he
at
did.
this
No,
time.
I'm pretty sure he didn't. No. If
So,
Celebrimbor would have done it, he
right.
forged the rings. If he would have taken over, which he kind of could, because as I said, the line of them, yes, it then passed to Fingolfin and then to his sons, son by son, but still, it wasn't clear who could take over the title of the High Kingship. Could have been Celebrimbor. He was the last
Well,
descendant of the second High King after Finwë, and so that would be really, really bad. So yeah,
and a
it's
lot
it's
of times it's just who's willing to follow you, who can claim the greatest number of people who say, "Yeah, sure, he's High King." It's like, well, I guess he's High King now. Oh, but he's not in the succession. Well, does that really matter
yeah.
if he's the one making all the decisions?
Maybe we will see, because we don't know of Celebrimbor and Gilgalad's relationship. We don't know how was that. Maybe we will see in the show, and maybe that even Tolkien wanted that to happen. There was a problem of Celebrimbor kind of wanting the throne back. He had a legit claim, and he had, like you said, with the Gwaith Emirdan, he founded his own little kingdom. He didn't, you don't really have the feeling he was under the rule of Gil-galad. Maybe we will see that in the show as well. That little what Fëanor always suspected Fingolfin of, that he wanted to claim the kingship. Maybe we will see that play out. I don't know. Could be interesting.
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing that potential tension explored. I think there's a lot of ways you could spin it, from openly hostile and Celebrimbor's actively seeking to usurp that role,
Yeah.
to, all the way down to like they're just sort of indifferent to each other, or,
Yeah.
maybe Gil-galad doesn't want Celebrimbor around. He remembers, what
Yeah.
happened with their respective the generations above them, or alternatively, Celebrimbor is like, yeah, Gil-galad, that sounds great, but I'm really not interested in this whole like High King of the Noldor project. I kind of want to go just forge with my dwarves, so I'm just going to start my own thing over here, and you can't really stop me.
Yeah. Yeah. That would
And
be
yeah,
interesting
so
to see to play out. I mean, we don't have any information
no,
talking about that, but that alone he mentions they were separated and not
Right.
kind of hints at it, but we don't know. But it could be something like a Game of Thrones thingy. I would be down for that. I would be interested.
I think elements of that sort of political maneuvering definitely have to be present. I think the difference is that, with Game of Thrones, that kind of seems to be the focal point,
Of course,
and then
yes,
and
that
then there's this like the threat of the walkers and everything, the winter coming.
yeah.
It's sort of more, that's just sort of the backdrop for all of the bickering. I think with the Tolkien series, you kind of have to invert that a little bit, where
Yeah, but you
the
have a lot of throne fighting in the Second Age with Gondor and Arnor, and even in Gondor, there's a usurper, who doesn't
yeah
want to accept that the actual one who has a claim on the throne, is mixed blood and all that. It's also, in a way, the fight for the throne, and you have that in Numenor many, many times.
yeah, and all of it.
It's not the one thing, it's not that
Right.
throne everybody is after, but you have that element a lot. And we know that Martin was heavily influenced by Tolkien, so yeah.
Hard to escape it, really. Yeah, I think that, again, definitely strong elements of that are going to have to come out,
Yeah.
whether it's fighting over the throne or just fighting over, power and
Yeah.
influence and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Good.
we have finally,
Yeah, but
finally,
this will be a two-part thingy because
yeah, we'll be breaking this into two parts. I guess I'll find a good place to break it, and then I'll just sort of give a little.
like the Silmarils.
Yeah, there we go. Three like the Silmarils. It's fate.
Yeah.
We'll have one be water themed and one be air themed, and it'll
Yep.
match with the fiery theme of the first one. Well, wonderful. This has been, of course, a great pleasure and very therapeutic to just rant about Noldor for several hours. And I think we've exhausted, at least I have, most of my thoughts on them for now. I'll probably get some more later today. Yeah, and we'll plan on doing the Teleri at the
Yes.
earliest opportunity.
Yeah. Perfect. And I learned a lot today because, as I say, you have different views, and we read the same book, or books.
Yeah, it's
um,
definitely plural.
my whole this is wait, where's my
Yeah,
talking? Oh no, it's above. You can't see it. It's one above. Wait,
there we go.
th- there's my talking
Nice. Yeah.
so but you see different things than I do, and that's so beautiful. I really love that, and have these kind of discussions.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more fertile grounds for thinking when you have someone who noticed different things or interpreted
Yeah.
something differently, and you can play off each other and sort
Yeah.
of, the ideas will synergize and make something that was more interesting than the sum of either of us just sitting in our little empty rooms
Yeah.
thinking alone.